This is the book that I am going to review today. Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, written by Roald Dahl and illustrated by Quentin Blake. I have already talked a lot about Roald Dahl in my previous episodes. Quentin Blake has illustrated more than 300 books. He's Roald Dahl's favorite illustrator. The main characters in this book are Charlie, Mr. Wonka, Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, and the 4 old grandparents of Charlie. This book is a continuation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Mr. Wonka owns an elevator which is entirely made up of glass, and it has thousands of buttons inside it which will take you to different rooms in his chocolate factory. His elevator is also heat proof, waterproof and knit proof. The story starts when Charlie and his family with Mr. Wonka go to space in the Great Glass Elevator. They're planning to go to the space hotel and Mr. Wonka had to press the right buttons to reach there safely. But because of Grandma Josephine, who thought Mr. Wonka was crazy, they went too high and started orbiting in space. Somehow they managed to get inside the space hotel, but the astronauts mistaken them to be people from Mars coming to bomb the hotel. But they were frightened to see the monstrous, shape-changing alien creatures known as Vermicious Knids. As they were frightened, they took off immediately. But the astronauts were not so lucky. They couldn't escape. And Mr. Wonka got a steel rope from his elevator and towed them back to the earth. But while towing them, the Knids almost strangled the elevator. But as Mr. Wonka's elevator was knit-proof, they reached the chocolate factory safely. Here is where interesting things happen. Mr. Wonka invented a pill known as Wonka White, which turns people 20 years younger. But the old people got too excited and had 4 pills each. Grandpa George and Grandma Josephine turned into small babies, and Grandma Georgina was completely missing. Charlie and Mr. Wonka went to Minus Land to save their grandmother. But Mr. Wonka gave too much of Vita Wonk, which is the opposite of Wonka White, which turns people 75 years older. And he turned Grandma Georgina 358 years old. And everyone thought she was an old fossil because she was just lying on bed like a rock, not doing anything. Her voice was completely cracked. And Mr. Wonka got to know the actual age of Grandma Georgina and turned her back to her original age, which was 78. But the 3 old people were very excited when the US president invited them to come to the White House, and that was the first time they came out of bed in 20 years. They started running and jumping everywhere. And here is the end of the story. My favorite part in this book was when Charlie and Mr. Wonka had to tow the astronauts back to the Earth, as this was the part which was most fun for me. I could not keep track of the time while reading this book, and I could not put the book down, and I completed it in a couple of hours. This book is so good. I would rate this book a 5 on 5, as it was fascinating to imagine such a great glass elevator, aliens, monsters, and especially the Vermicious Knids. And of course, every part of this book was interesting. I would recommend this book to everyone I know. Thank you and have a nice day ahead.